Hey everyone. So today we're going to be starting Unit 1. Unit 1 is entitled The Orientation to the Human Body. I tell students that I really wish that you could get almost a foreign language credit along with a science credit when you take A&P, because when you finish this one unit, you're going to find that your vocabulary and understanding of medical terminology is going to be so much greater. So today what I want to do is I just want to walk through some of the basics of A&P, talk a little bit about what they are, those particular terms, and then we're going to talk about a very important process known as homeostasis. We're going to look at that as well. And then we're going to wrap up right there. And then we'll do a second lecture that will talk about the language of anatomy. And then the last lecture will just kind of be tying up all of the loose ends. So let me pull up my PowerPoint. This PowerPoint, remember, will be available to you on the website, so you can always go there and you can check it out as well. So the human body is truly a remarkable machine. We're actually going to watch a video called The Incredible Human Machine later on, because it is the most efficient machine that there is that's ever been known. It just does things that you don't see with any other machinery. So let's talk a little bit about it. So one of the things that I noticed with my students is that as they're taking notes and as they're doing things in class, a lot of times they write down some trivial things. We're going to be doing a reading assignment in our face-to-face class, and then for you virtual learners, you're going to be doing it at home. And one of the things that I ask students to do is I ask them to annotate their reading. I know that that's something that you probably do in your English classes, but I like for students to underline or highlight important information. If it's really important, maybe put an exclamation point. If it's something that's interesting, they can put a little asterisk, or if it's something they don't understand, put a question mark. And I have found that with students, a lot of times they think they're doing that top picture, but what they're actually doing is that bottom picture, because they're just going through the trivial. Okay. So at this point, you're actually going to pause the video and you're going to complete your reading assignment, which is in the Google Classroom, or it's been given to you in your face-to-face class. So if you would just pause your video. When you've finished that assignment, you can come back in and start playing it again. Okay, so from your reading, I hope that you were able to find these concepts and this information in your reading. So one thing that I want you to know are what three main concepts encompass or the umbrella of A&P. And so if you would jot these down, or highlight them if you've printed out the notes. But one thing is the structures and functions complement one another, meaning that our body is put together in a way that makes it a perfect machine, allows it to work like it's supposed to. Matter of fact, individuals whose bodies are not put together the way that they're supposed to have problems. My mom was in education for 28 years, and in that time, she saw many students because she taught students with special needs, but she would have some students sometimes who are fine academically, but they may have some problems physically. And so they would come to her maybe during PE or something like that for, some other type of activity. And I remember she had a little girl who had a syndrome where everything in her body was mirror imaged, meaning everything in her body was flip-flopped. She had all of her parts. They were in the about location where they were supposed to be, but because they were not specifically where they were supposed to be, she had problems with breathing. Her heart had problems. She had problems with digestion. So we're put together in a way that our functions of our organs work with that structure. So they complement one another. Another thing is structural organization, which we're going to look at in just a few minutes, how we're put together. And then finally is homeostasis, which we will discuss in a few minutes as well. So what is anatomy? The big thing that I want you to know is that top underlined bullet, the structure of the body parts. Anatomy is basically diagrams. It's dissection. It's looking at actual body parts to see what they look like, where they are in relationship to other body parts. And the thing about anatomy is it's concrete, which means it doesn't change. You don't just all of a sudden go, oh, we're going to move the heart somewhere else. That's not how it works. It's a concrete subject that does not change. So when we learn these structures and we learn where they're found, we know that that's something that we will always remember and that it will always hold true. Physiology, and what I want you to know is that top bullet there, it's the functions. Physiology are the functions of those body parts and how they work within a system, what processes those body systems go through. And just looking at it, if anatomy is concrete, it's structures, physiology are processes and functions. Which one do you think is probably more difficult to learn? If you said physiology, you're absolutely right. Physiology has lots of steps, and the big thing is you have to know anatomy to understand physiology. You won't understand what the functions mean if you don't know what the body parts are. So we always learn anatomy first, and then we go into the physiology of that particular body system's processes. So here are some topics of anatomy, and all you really need to know are what are underlined. I'm going to tell you a little bit of the stuff under it, though, to kind of help you to understand. Um, the macroscopic anatomy. Macroscopic anatomy means that it's the big stuff, what you're able to see with the naked eye. We call that gross anatomy, not like, ew, gross, but gross is in big. It's a big thing. Macroscopic anatomy are what dissections fall under. And yes, you dissect. One of the things that you'll do in medical school, for those of you who are interested in becoming doctors, you will take a class called gross anatomy. And gross anatomy is where they give you a cadaver, which is a body, and you dissect that body over the course of a school year. And you're probably thinking, that's disgusting, that's gross. But let me ask you, if you needed to go in and have heart surgery and they're rolling you in the OR and the cardiologist is standing there and he is so excited and you're like, hey, doc, why are you so excited? He goes, this is the first time I've actually performed this surgery on an actual body. I've always just done it on an app. You're going to be like me, rolling right back out of that hospital room, because who wants someone who's never had any practice working on them? Dissections are important. Dissections are important in that they allow us to see the actual body parts and where they're located. It helps us to understand how their functions work because we can see that. Some subdivisions are regional anatomy, which we're going to be learning at our next class. Systemic anatomy, the body systems, and then surface anatomy is pretty important. I always tell students, this is a good example. If you've ever been to the doctor because your stomach hurts, the very first thing that the doctor does is mash on your stomach. I can remember when I was a teenager, I was having a really bad pain in my side, and I complained about it for about 4 or 5 days, and finally my mom said, that's it, we're going to the doctor. So she hauled off and took me to the doctor, and I'm laying there on the table, and the doctor says, hey, what's the problem? I said, well, I'm hurting here in my side. And the very first thing that he did was he mashed as hard as he could on that side. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? I just told you it hurts. The reason why is because under the surface of my abdomen, there are particular body parts. And if I hurt in one area, it's an appendix. If I hurt in the other area, it's gallbladder. If I hurt in this area, it's intestines. So we use surface anatomy a lot of times to be less invasive in the way that we diagnose patients. Microscopic anatomy, that's another one that you need to know that's underlined. You may want to write that one down. Microscopic anatomy is obviously things we can't see with the naked eye. So we're going to have to use microscopes. And so some subdivisions there are cytology, which are cells, and histology, which would be tissues. Now, under anatomy, there's some other things. Developmental anatomy is one you need to know. Developmental anatomy can range as young as embryology. Women who find out they're pregnant, if there's a potential problem with their pregnancy, or they're called a high risk pregnancy, they may put them with an embryologist or a particular obstetrics doctor who studies the development of that fetus. When you were a child, when you were first born, your mom took you to your pediatrician where they would measure your head and your body and your weight, and they would write all that information down to see how you were developing to make sure that you developed correctly. We even go now as adults to the doctor. You should go and get a physical each year, and that's to check for changes in your body as you begin to age. When you hit certain age levels, there's certain doctors that you're supposed to be going to because at those particular ages you're more likely to develop problems, and so they tell you to go to the doctor. And so that's an example of developmental anatomy. We even have it where they study old people, geriatrics, where they study older people and how they're aging. Pathological anatomy is one. This is going to be looking at tissues that are diseased. Anytime that you've ever had a biopsy taken, or if you've ever had, like, for instance, your tonsils or your appendix out, that went to a pathologist who studied it to make sure that you didn't have something like cancer. Radiographic anatomy, radiographic, radiology, ray, X-rays. Radiographic anatomy are people who read X-rays, CT scans, MRIs. Molecular biology, these are not the individuals we think of when we think of medical doctors, but they're very important because molecular biologists are studying us at the very lowest structural organization, trying to make sure that we build ourselves correctly. And then anatomical terminology. This is just a particular part of medicine where you study terminology, and basically you end up learning that in all branches of medicine. Now, physiology, I don't ask you to write these down because there's so many of them, but here are three that are kind of common. Renal physiology. The word renal, does anyone know what that is? Renal physiology are kidneys and kidney function. So you go to a urologist who would study your renal output. Neurophysiology, and I'm sure everybody knows neuro means the brain. So they study the nerves in the brain. And then cardiovascular physiology, they're going to study your heart and your circulatory system and how it functions. So those are some topics of physiology. I tell people basically all the ologies are the doctors you go to. Ophthalmology, eyes. You go to gastroenterology, that's the stomach. So you have all of these different doctors who study all these different ologies. And when they're in medical school, they choose to go into that particular specialty and they become an expert in that field. So when we get put together, our body gets put together in a very specific way. This starts at the very lowest structural level, which is the chemical level. So the chemical level is going to be like atoms and molecules, things like that. And if you get the right molecules put together with the right chemistry and the right electricity, you develop a cell. And then that cell will work with other cells just like it to do a particular function, and that's what makes a tissue. And then if you get enough tissues working together to do this particular function, then you've created an organ. And then if you have enough organs that are all pitching in for this one process, now you've developed an organ system. And if you get all the organ systems that are needed, then you've developed an organism. And here's just a picture of the way that it's put together. It's a chemical level all the way up to our cellular level, tissue level, organ system level, and then eventually the organism. So if there's nothing else that I teach you this semester, I think that teaching you how to stay alive is probably beneficial to everyone. So there are some things that our body does, or things that we do to make sure that our body sustains life. So let's go through the way we maintain life. So we do these through functions, and these are necessary life functions. You can do these things. And if you don't do these things, you have imbalances, which means you are sick. So the very first life function is maintaining boundaries, meaning that our insides and our outsides need to be specific from one another, meaning that we have skin that protects us from the outside, meaning that in our body it's partitioned into particular areas so that that way our body functions like it's supposed to. We maintain boundaries, and when those boundaries are breached, our body has to do things to overcome that, and that puts us in an imbalance. Movement, we have to be able to move. We move from the very cellular level We move our tissues like blood and things like that, but also our body moving in itself. People that are stationary for too long can have some serious problems. They get bed sores, they can get clots, things like that. So, movement is a necessary life function. Responsiveness, meaning the ability to be irritated by chemicals, an allergen, or things like feel pain, feel heat, feel cold, and we respond to that. Later on, we're going to talk about a nervous system disorder where individuals are born lacking the ability to respond to those situations. And you think, hey, that'd be kind of cool not to feel pain. It's really not. Pain is good because it tells us when we're going to harm ourselves, so we stop. If you don't have the ability to feel pain, then you don't know when to stop. So you may sit there and continue to scratch yourself and scratch and scratch and scratch till you scratch a hole in your cheek. Or you may bite your lip till you bite your lip off because it doesn't hurt. So responsiveness is important. It's our body's way of letting us know something's not quite right. Digestion. We need to be able to take food in, break that food down, and use those nutrients. And then metabolism is our ability to draw out those nutrients to produce ATP, that life source, that energy that we need to do all of our functions. Then excretion is extremely important. If we can't get waste out of our body, then we'll become toxic. So we excrete through our urinary system, the digestive tract, and then also we sweat a lot of these excretions so that way we don't stay toxic. We even breathe out carbon dioxide so we can get those things out of our body. Reproduction. Now, reproduction, please don't go run home and tell your parents, I must reproduce in order to survive. That is not true. When I say reproduction, I mean things like when your cells are old and decrepit, you make new cells. When tissue has been damaged, you generate new tissue. Yes, as a human race, we do need people to reproduce, but you don't have to do that right now. Growth is important. If our body does not grow properly, then we don't function properly. I always use this as kind of a little segue to talk about a student that I worked with. Years ago, my high school used to host the Special Olympics, which was an Olympic event for individuals who have physical and mental handicaps. And it was always so much fun. It's much like Miracle League and Camp Sunshine, except this was the Olympics. You had races and things like that. Well, my mom was a special education teacher, and so I was always recruited to help out, which I didn't mind doing because I loved it. And one particular year, I had a kid named Rico that was given to me, and Rico was older than me, but he rode around in an infant seat because he was itty bitty bitty. Rico had a genetic disorder where he didn't grow. And matter of fact, we won the standing long jump, even though he could not walk, because I had some friends of mine who were on the track team to hold on, and they jumped with him, and he ended up winning a medal in the standing long jump. And he was so excited, but he couldn't speak. He couldn't feed himself because he didn't have those abilities because he had never grown. And Rico ended up passing away later on because his heart just gave out. Because your heart has to grow to be able to keep up with that longevity of our lifespan, and his didn't grow, and so it just eventually gave out. But growth is important. That's why when you're a baby, your parents took you to the pediatrician to make sure you were growing properly. So these 8 things are life functions. I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have to list these on the test. So put a little star by them. You need to know what they are. Now, another thing that's important for us to stay alive are survival needs, things that we have to have in order to be able to survive. Nutrients. Now, notice that is not food. Food is not a survival need. You do not have to have food. Somebody can hook you up to an IV that's giving you nutritional composition, and as long as you're getting some type of nutrients into your body, that's all you need. So nutrients. Oxygen. If you don't think you need it, try holding your breath. You have to have oxygen. It's important in order for us to do most of the things that we need to do. Water is important. That's why we need to drink water. We need to make sure we have plenty of fluids in our body because water is extremely important. Normal body temperature, that 98.6 degrees is how our body best works. If it gets too high or it gets too low, our body doesn't work properly. And then atmospheric pressure. Just this summer, we took a trip to the mountains. And I tell you, it's a lot different that first day that you're up in the mountains, especially when you're way up high, like in the Rockies. The air is thinner, and your body has to get used to that. And so we have a specific atmospheric pressure range that we thrive in. That's why we can't go to space without a spacesuit on, because the atmospheric pressure is not what our body needs. And so we wouldn't be able to survive. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about is homeostasis, and then we're going to wrap up this lecture. So, homeostasis, I've talked about balance a couple of times as we've discussed this past lecture, but homeostasis is basically our ability to maintain a relatively stable internal condition even though the outside world changes continuously. And probably a better definition, it's just a little easier, is this one that I have underlined. So if you'll write that down or jot that down or make a note of it. Homeostasis indicates a dynamic state of equilibrium or balance. If your body is in balance, you are healthy. If your body is unbalanced, then that means that you have some type of illness. So the good thing is that our body pretty much takes care of this for us. Every now and then it'll get out of whack and we can't get it fixed on our own. And so we have to go to the doctor and get medicine, or we have to go to the doctor and have something done to us so that we can get our body back on track. But for the most part, our body does this for us on its own. And let me show you how we do it, okay? So this very first one is called negative feedback mechanism. Before you write down anything or read any of that, I want you just to listen to me, okay? In my house, I have a central air conditioning unit, and during the summer in South Mississippi, a central air conditioning unit is extremely important in my house. So I like to keep my house at a nice balmy 68 degrees, okay? So I have my temperature set for the month of July around 68 degrees. So in the morning, I usually wake up and the house is cool because nobody's up and the air conditioner is turned off. But then I get up and I make a pot of coffee and I might start breakfast. Then my husband may get up and start moving around. I may get the dryer going. The kids get up and start moving around. And as they get up and start moving around, the temperature in the house slowly creeps up to say 69, 70 degrees. Well, when it hits that 70-degree mark, I'll hear the central air conditioning unit kick on. Boom. And it kicks on and cool air starts blowing out of my vents. And it begins to drop the temperature down, 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 down. And when the temperature gets around 67 degrees, it cuts off and then the house will stay cool. Well, it's not going to stay cool for long though, because people are coming in and out, things are moving around, we've got stuff happening all over the house. So the temperature goes back up, and as soon as it gets above 68 degrees, boom, the air conditioner kicks on and it blows cool air. So the air conditioner's job is to keep my air around 68 degrees inside the house. So a negative feedback mechanism shuts off or reduces the intensity of the original stimulus. Why is it negative? It's negative because it's going one way and then it all of a sudden goes the other way. Okay? It's negative because it changes the direction of the stimulus. So my temperature is going up, 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 up. The AC kicks on and it brings it down, 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 down. Okay? So another way that you may see this is, let's just say that my blood pressure is going down, 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 down. And so I drink some water and that allows my blood pressure to go back up, 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 up. It changes direction. And because it changes direction, that means that it is a negative feedback. Okay. The goal of negative feedback is to prevent sudden severe changes. This happens all the time. Body temperature, pH, water levels, sugar levels, insulin, things like that. They're constantly happening. It's ongoing. We don't really ever even notice that it's happening unless it becomes too bad one way or the other, okay? So that's negative feedback mechanism. So if negative is the first one, what do you think the second feedback would be? Positive. Positive feedback's a little bit different. It enhances or exaggerates the original stimulus. So let me tell you this story, okay? I want you to picture this, like Sophia on the Golden Girls. Picture this. Summerall, Mississippi, 2003. It's Friday, February the 13th. February the 13th. And I am about 9.5 months pregnant with my first child, Jackson. I was supposed to have given birth to Jackson on February the 4th, but apparently he's determined to go to college in utero at this point. I am miserable. I have tried everything. I jumped off the back porch a few times. I walked, I ran, I did jazzercise. I was miserable. I tried eating hot foods. I tried eating sweet foods. I tried eating cold foods, whatever I could to try to get him out of there because I was miserable. Okay. So Friday the 13th, my husband's at school. I'm at home because I no longer have clothes that will fit me and I can barely stand upright. And I have a contraction. It's a small one, but it's enough. So I call my husband and I'm like, I think this is it. I think it's time. Before I even get off the phone, Mr. Fortbury has pulled in on two wheels, has thrown me in the truck, and we are on our way to the doctor. So we get to my doctor's office in Hattiesburg and he goes in and does an examination. He comes in, he's like, Erin, I'm sorry, but you were not, in labor. I'm sorry. And I'm like, are you kidding me, doc? I'm like, I'm dying here. You got to help me. I'm dying. Okay. So he says, well, he said, I tell you what, he said, let's plan to induce labor. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. So he tells me to come in on Saturday morning early. They're going to, get a drip going and they're going to induce labor and I'll have the baby sometime that evening. I'm like, sounds great. So on our way home, Mr. Fortbury and I stop and get something to eat. And the doctor had given me these teeny tiny little sleeping pills so I get some rest that night before I came back in. Okay. So we get home that night. You remember, we're young, so we're watching some MTV, and I take my little sleeping pill, and next thing I know, I am just zonked. So I get up and I shuffle to the waddle to the bedroom, and I get in the bed and I go to sleep. Well, I don't know how long has passed, but sometime later, Mr. Fortbury comes down the hallway and he starts shaking me. And he's like, Erin, 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 you got to get up. And I'm like, what? He goes, you got to get up. Your water broke. And I'm so tired. That medicine's made me so tired. I'm like, oh, we'll just buy another one. I'm good. And I roll back over and he's like, no, 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 you got to go. You got to go. So he's got me up and he's getting me dressed and we get in the truck. Once again, not a twinge, not a anything. Just my water broke. Then all of a sudden, it hits me. My first honest to goodness contraction. It literally felt like something reached up from below and grabbed me around the gut and was just wrenching it in half. I thought I was going to die. It hurt so bad. I screamed bloody murder. I grabbed Mr. Fortman. I'm like, ah. And so he's like, okay, that's a contraction. And he starts keeping up with them. Well, every few minutes I would have another one. And every time they would get a little closer and a little closer, a little closer. By the time we finally get to the hospital, they come out with a little wheelchair and everything. And they're like, what's going on? What's going on? I'm like, I'm in labor. I'm in labor. I'm in labor. They're like, how close are your contractions? I'm like, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Like, oh, you're going to have this baby anytime now. So I go from having contractions every 5 minutes, every 4 minutes, every 3 minutes, every 2 minutes to basically having one great big long sustained contraction. And then 17 and a half hours later, Jackson was born. But I tell you all of this because this is a perfect example of positive feedback mechanisms. Positive feedback mechanism would be like labor, like going and having contractions. Because what happens is it starts small and then it gets more and more and more and more intense until it's all over with, until you go back to the original way that you were. It's considered positive because it goes in the same direction. So the contractions get more and more and more intense. Or it may be in a situation where it lessens it and it brings it down the other way. But because it goes in one direction, we call that positive feedback mechanism. Now, I do want you to notice these control infrequent events. You don't have a baby every day unless you're a Duggar. Okay, so it's infrequent events. Another example of positive feedback mechanism was you get stabbed. Somebody walks up and stabs you. Your body doesn't shut down blood flow. Instead, it sends more blood to the site because the more blood that goes, the more platelets that go, and the more platelets that go, the more chances you have of building a blood clot and stopping the whole thing. Okay, so that would be positive feedback mechanisms. Okay, so that kind of wraps up today. So we talked about concepts, we talked about topics of anatomy, topics of physiology. We also looked at how we're put together structurally, and then we discussed homeostasis. So you have a couple of worksheets that'll be listed in your Google Classroom for you to actually type into, fill out, and submit for me that covers some of the information that we just discussed. If you did not finish the reading, the text for this portion, I suggest that you go back and read through that text excerpt and finish annotating so that way you'll be prepared for the test that's coming up. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next lecture.